Hi everyone, my name is Laura Wiss and today I'll be giving a demonstration on the segmentation of hippocampal subfields in the hippocampal body, the midsection of the hippocampus, on T2 weighted MRI according to the protocol described in this paper. If you haven't done so already, I would recommend that you first read this paper and watch my other tutorials on hippocampal anatomy and segmentation. So this paper actually describes a much larger protocol for the segmentation of medial temporal lobe subregions, but today I'll just focus on the segmentation of hippocampal subfields in the hippocampal body. So for most subfields in the hippocampal body, we just propose one set of rules, except for the CA3 region and in particular the border with the dentate gyrus, for which we have two different sets of rules dependent on the data that you have. So I'll just show you both quickly. So what you see here is a hippocampal body slice and the segmentation of subfields in the right. And the border between the CA3 in yellow and the dentate gyrus in blue is determined by this line of darker voxels that you can see in the left image, which is the endfolial pathway. So if you have data in which you can see this endfolial pathway, you can use it to determine the border between the dentate gyrus and the CA3 region. Unfortunately, this feature is not always visible in data, so in case you have data in which you cannot see this feature, we propose a different set of rules, and that is shown in this figure. And this is more of a geometric set of rules which doesn't use this endfolial pathway. And based on a number of lines, as you can see here, we determine the border between CA3 and the dentate gyrus, so between yellow and blue. And today I'll be explaining both of these different rule sets. So what you see here is an MRI scan, and this is a T2 weighted MRI scan where the gray matter is actually lighter than the white matter, and the cerebrospinal fluid is bright. So this is the hippocampus. And this is medial and this is lateral. And the hippocampus is bordered by white matter here, cerebrospinal fluid, and in this case some vessels. So the cerebrospinal fluid is not bright in every location, probably because of partial voluming. And there may actually be some choroid plexus here, although I'm not 100% sure about that. Finally, the hippocampus is bordered by this adjacent cortical region. So the way we determine the border with this region is we first draw this line and try to find the most medial point of the white matter, then try to find the most medial point of the gray matter, and then connect the two dots, and that would be your border between the hippocampus and the adjacent cortical region. So I'm actually gonna start by outlining the whole hippocampus. So I'm gonna again use the points that I just indicated. I'm now drawing the line with the white matter, and I'm now using actually, if you can see, this line of dark voxels, which is called the alveus, which I'm not including in my segmentation. And this is the outline of the hippocampus more or less. So the first thing that I'll do is actually clean up the segmentation. Actually, a number of the rules for the other subfields can depend on the outer borders of the hippocampus, so it's therefore important that these outer borders are correct before we move on to the next thing. Okay. So then the next thing that I'll do is segment the dentate gyrus, which I'll give a blue label. So if you remember from my previous tutorial, the border of the dentate gyrus, its surrounding region, is actually determined by this dark line of voxels, which we often call the dark band, which represents the stratum radiatum lacunosum moleculare, or SRLM. So in this protocol, we're going to try and split this line of dark voxels between the dentate gyrus and the surrounding regions, and in case when there's one line of dark voxels, we include it in the surrounding regions. I'm gonna draw a line more or less through the midpoint, this dark band. And what you can see is that it stops right here. So I'm actually not sure about the border between the dentate gyrus at this point. So I'm just gonna draw it like this, and we're gonna adapt this border at a later point. So this is more or less the outline. I'm gonna adapt it. Similar as for the outer borders, we actually use the borders of the dentate gyrus to determine some other borders for subfields, so it's important that this border is correct before we move on. Okay. And then the next thing that we'll do is draw the cyst. So what you can see here is some bright voxels, which actually represents a hippocampal cyst or a hippocampal sulcal cavity. We don't want to include this in the blue label, the dentate gyrus, so we're gonna outline this and give it a separate label. And what you would see right next to the cyst is actually 2 lines of dark voxels. So normally I would include this line of dark voxels in the dentate gyrus label, but because there is a cyst right next to it, we're not going to do that because the cyst, according to our protocol, is supposed to border the red region. So I'm going to keep it like this. So then the next thing that I'm going to do is draw the border between the subiculum and the CA1 region. So I'm going to give the subiculum the purple, a purple label. So to determine this border, I'm going to first draw a line between the most medial point of the dentate gyrus to the most lateral point. And as there is a cyst in this case, I'm going to instead look at the most lateral point of the cyst. And there are a number of voxels, so I'm actually going to take the midpoint. So then from the midpoint of this line, and actually an ITK snap that's indicated by this little dot, I'm going to go straight down. And then I'm going to try and find the line that is perpendicular to the gray matter. So I'm going to go through the midpoint of the gray matter here. And I think actually the line perpendicular is just straight down. So this would be more or less the border. So I'm now going to outline this. Adapt it. So normally I would not draw these other lines actually, but just to demonstrate how I would do it, I'm drawing them now. So I'm going to remove these lines. And what is important, so actually I'm going to put this first line back. So what is important is that you find the most medial point of the dentate gyrus here. It doesn't have to be adjacent to the subiculum, but just can also be more superior, but for the placement of this first line, it's important that you find the most medial point of the dentate gyrus. So the next thing that I'm going to do is draw the CA2 region, which I'll give a green label. And for that, I'm first going to find the most lateral point of the dentate gyrus, and in this case, because there's a cyst, the most lateral point of the cyst. And then I'm going to move 1 voxel in a medial direction, and that would be my starting point. And from there, I'm going to draw a line perpendicular to the gray matter. That would be my CA1, CA2 border. And then I'm going to circle back. And I'm actually not sure about this medial border of CA2. I'm just going to place it in this location, but I'm going to adapt it at a later point. So this would be more or less my CA2 region. And again, this is the CA2, CA1 border is correct, and I'm adapting this border later. So then the final region that I'm going to segment is CA3. So for CA3, I'm first going to use the antfolial pathway. It's a little bit faint, but you can see the border right here. And then I'm going to circle back to this endpoint of the SRLM and then outline it like this. I'm going to add this voxel here, and then just add these 2 as well. So now I'm going to adapt, after this I'm going to adapt the CA2, CA3 border. So for this I'm going to draw a line from the most lateral point of the DG to the most medial point of CA3, like this. And then at the midpoint, which is right here, I'm drawing a line straight up, and that would be my CA2, CA3 border. So I see that I need to add just one voxel here, and that would be my CA2, CA3 border. I'll remove this line. So this would be my segmentation of hippocampal subfields in the body using the endfolial pathway. So to summarize again, we start with outlining the whole hippocampus, then segment the dentate gyrus. We're approximating this medial border, which we're going to adapt later. Then segment the subiculum, then CA2, again approximating the medial border, which we're going to adapt later. Then segment CA3, and then we go back and adjust the CA2, CA3 border. So now I'm going to show you the second rule. So I'm going to draw over this CA3 label. And I'm going to determine it again, but with the other rule. So for this one, I'm first going to draw a line from the most superior point of the hippocampus. And if you have a line of voxels, I would take the midpoint to the most medial point of the dentate gyrus, touching the subiculum. So right here. Then the next line that I'm drawing will be starting at this point and then following the dark band next to the first portion of the subiculum, so like this. So then the third line starts at the midpoint of the first line and is going to be parallel to the second line. And the nice thing about ITK snap is that it gives you the angle of the new line with the previous lines. And I have a bit of difficulty finding the right angle. It's a bit of an approximation here. So an important of this third line is that it starts at this edge of the dentate gyrus and then ends at this edge of the dentate gyrus. And then the fourth line goes from the midpoint of the third line and then at a 90-degree angle. So more or less like this, and everything in this region is then CA3. So I'm going to give that the yellow label. Okay. So now I'm going to remove these lines because I'm still going to have to adapt the CA2, CA3 border. So now I'm going to draw a line from the most lateral dentate gyrus, and again from the cyst in this case to the most medial CA3. And then I'm going to draw a line straight up. And what you see here is actually that this point falls right in the middle of a voxel. So if that happens, I personally count that voxel towards CA3 and put the line at a more lateral location. So I am gonna take this as my CA2, CA3 border. So I'm gonna have to add this one voxel to the green label. So I'm gonna remove this line. So this would be the final segmentation according to the second rule, the geometrical rule for the CA3 region. But again, the order is the same. So I first draw the CA2, where I'm not sure about the medial border, then I draw CA3, and then I'm gonna adapt the CA2, CA3 border. So I'm now gonna do this in one more slice. So what you can see here is that this portion of the hippocampus is relatively flat, and in this slice it's more round. So I'm also gonna show this rule in a more round hippocampus. So again, the first thing that I'll do is draw the outline of the whole hippocampus. And again, I'm first going to try and find the most medial point of the white matter here and the most medial point of the gray matter. So by taking that point, I'm now drawing the border with the white matter. And again, I'm using the alveus here, which I'm not including in my segmentation. So then again, I'm gonna go over this segmentation and adjust it a little bit. Okay, so then the second thing is labeling the dentate gyrus, which I'll give a blue label. And again, I'm gonna draw a line through the midpoint of the dark band here. And again, it stops around here, so I don't know about this portion. I'm just gonna draw the line like this and we're gonna adapt it later. So now I'm gonna clean this up a little bit. And actually with the S, I can turn this segmentation on and off. Okay. So then the next thing that I'm gonna do is label the subiculum, again in a purple label. So for this, again, I'm gonna draw a line from the most medial point of the dentate gyrus to the most lateral point of the dentate gyrus. And again, when there are multiple voxels, I'll go in the middle. And then at the midpoint, I'm gonna go straight down, and then again, the line is gonna be more or less perpendicular to the gray matter of the hippocampus. So I think at this point it's gonna be at a slight angle like this. So then the CA1 subiculum border will be like this. Okay. I'm gonna remove these labels here. And the next thing that I'll do is segment CA2, and I'll give that a green label. So again, we're finding the most lateral point of the dentate gyrus and then moving one voxel over. So that would be the starting point. And then I'll draw a line perpendicular to the gray matter, and I'm circling back. Again, I'm not sure about this border yet. I'm just gonna put it in this location and we're gonna adapt it later. So this would be my CA2 region, and in particular my CA2, CA1 border. And then the final thing again is the CA3 region in yellow. So if you look at the raw image here, you don't really see the endfolial pathway well. So you see maybe some voxels, but it's very faint. So I don't think I can use the endfolial pathway in this particular slice. And actually, if I cannot use it in this slice, I wouldn't use it in this subject or in the study in which this subject would be included. I just showed it for demonstration in the other slide. So for now, I'm just gonna use the geometrical rule. So again, the first line that I'm drawing, starting at the most superior place of the hippocampus, and if there are multiple voxels, I'm gonna go in the middle, and then go to the most medial point of the dentate gyrus, touching the subiculum, like this. Then the second line actually follows again the dark band next to the first portion of the subiculum. And then the third line again starts at the midpoint of this first line and is parallel to this second line. But again, it's important to start at this edge of the hippocampus, of the dentate gyrus, and then it ends at this point of the dentate gyrus. And then the fourth line starts at this middle point, and then, oh, that's actually not at the midpoint. It starts at the midpoint and then is at a 90-degree angle, more or less. So everything in this region I'm gonna label CA3. Okay, so now I'm gonna remove all these labels, all these lines, and now I'm gonna adapt the CA2, CA3 border. So again, for this, I'm gonna draw a line from the most lateral point of the dentate gyrus to the most medial point of CA3, like this. So then this would be, the midpoint would be my border between CA2 and CA3. So I'm gonna adapt this. And actually this voxel is below the SRLM, so I wouldn't include that in the green label, so I'll leave that in yellow. I'm gonna remove the line. So this would be my final segmentation in this particular body slice. So to reiterate, we're gonna start with outlining the whole hippocampus, then segment dentate gyrus, then segment subiculum, then CA2, where we're not sure yet about the medial border, then CA3, and then adapt that and adapt the border between CA2 and CA3. So I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.